In this video, we aim to answer the age-old question of whether any passengers and crew were still alive in the Titanic's stern after her final descent into the freezing Atlantic on April 15, 1912. So with this question, your first thought is most likely, well, no one could have survived the stern flooding before making her final descent, and you would be right, if the stern had fully flooded. What sets the stern apart from the bow is that the stern flooded at a faster rate and actually had air pockets trapped within the ship, which we'll be looking into detail later in this video. And this will help answer the question of whether anyone who was trapped in the stern could have still been alive after the sinking. To answer this question, we need to go back to the early morning hours of April 15, 1912. In the early morning hours of April 15, 1912, the Titanic crew was quickly moving to get passengers off the doomed liner into all the lifeboats. But as the ship was sinking at a slow rate at first, most passengers and crew were not yet panicking. This started to change as the list grew more uneven as the bow flooded and the water spilled over the watertight doors. As the Titanic bridge started taking on water right around 2 a.m., keep in mind the exact time is unknown, but final reports of seeing Captain Smith put him last seen on the bridge at 2 a.m., just after relieving his crew their positions and telling the crew it's every man for himself. As the bridge went under, Titanic quickly started to flood as water started pouring into the grand staircase and other open spaces, which put a strain on the hull of the ship. At approximately 2:15 a.m., the Titanic hull was struggling to handle the enormous weight of the water pulled down on the bow, and with the stern out of the water, the pressure on the hull finally caused the hull to give out and break just before the third funnel. This breakup would have been most likely loud for those in the lifeboats nearby, and on the bow, we do see at least one or two imported boilers in the breakup zone, which helps show how much force was involved around Boiler Room 1, which was supplying steam to the Titanic's lights until the final moment. Now, before we move on to the stern's final descent, you may be wondering, were any passengers lost in the breakup alone? And the answer is yes. We are aware of a few passengers who lost their lives during the breakup, including a mother and her two sons who fell into the break as the stern and piping broke apart and the wiring was ripped. And based on survivor testimony, there may have been some small explosions from the hull tearing itself apart in these moments. As the breakup unfolded, the double bottom helped keep the stern and bow together for a short time. But right after the bow broke off, the stern fell backwards and quickly started to flood. The flooding, while quick, did not actually completely flood the interior of the stern. While the stern didn't have any watertight areas, which would have had major air pockets, we do know air pockets did exist in some areas, which were most likely behind the rare watertight doors due to the passenger testimony of hearing what they called underwater explosions seconds after the stern was out of sight. Today we know the explosions the passengers heard were related to the stern imploding, which we'll look into soon. So, going back to our original questions, could any passengers or crew have been alive in the stern after it left the surface? The answer is yes, they could have been, if they found an air pocket. Now you will notice here that there's watertight doors in multiple areas. But these watertight doors wouldn't have stopped water coming in during the final moments. Hence, the reason I could say that is many of these spaces are open and on both sides or in one area, which means that the ones below deck would have had a better chance of survival for those last few seconds after it left the surface than anybody up here on the upper decks. Now, we do know that near the end, multiple first and second class passengers and crew members reported seeing third class passengers trying to reach the boat decks, but due to language barriers, many that were still below deck in the stern may have been trapped in the stern after the breakup. While we cannot be certain if any passengers or crew were actually trapped, we do have witness accounts to show a high possibility of this happening. While some still believe gates were used to keep the third-class passengers below deck, this has been disproven multiple times not to be the case, and the third-class passengers could reach boat decks with some help from other passengers or by following the signs. The gates could have also easily been broken down as they were thin steel, mainly used to separate second and third-class areas of the ship. We are also aware today of third-class passengers being helped to the boat deck by second and first-class passengers when asked, or if they were lost. For some of these passengers who helped, this would have been their final acts, as they knew they would not make it off the ship that morning. For the passengers who were reportedly last seen heading towards the stern of the Titanic, some of the accounts reported that they did not speak English, and in some cases could not translate the English signs in time, which is why they are believed that they were trapped below in their final moments. So how long could any passengers have survived in the stern? Well, this is a good question. For passengers who were near the breakup zone, it would have been over quick as the ship broke in half and water started flooding into the ship. This would have included any engineers who were still in the engine room in those final moments, who may have stayed behind after being relieved of their duties shortly before 2 a.m. For passengers who made it further back into the stern and found rooms where air pockets were able to develop, this is an entirely different story, as these air pockets would have been created thanks to the watertight doors, which were most likely closed in these areas and would have helped slow the water entering the stern in those final moments. Once the water reached the watertight doors, it would have taken just seconds for the water to pour over the tops of these doors, in which case the end would have been quick due to the implosions involved within the stern, as we'll be talking about shortly. While the air trapped in the room would have been limited and would have only lasted the passengers so long, depending on how many people were trapped in the room, the air pocket size, and other factors, they would have survived about 15 seconds after the Titanic left the surface. While this may not seem long, it would have been quick for the passengers as the pressure quickly increased around the stern and the stern started to implode during her descent to the ocean floor. Overall, any passengers or crew would have never felt anything, and it would have been over quick for them as the pressure increased. While the stern today is destroyed, much of its damage is from the implosions heard by passengers and the spiral she took to the ocean floor. So overall, any passengers or crew who are still in the stern would have survived just seconds after the final plunge. In closing, we find that it is possible that passengers and crew could have survived in the stern till after she was fully submerged, but not for long. While some may wonder, could anyone have been alive by the time the stern came to rest on the sea floor? The answer to this question is no. Any passengers or crew in the stern would not have survived more than 30 seconds after the stern left the surface that morning. From the intense pressure and the freezing cold water, the stern is believed to have started to implode within 15 seconds of leaving the surface. Overall, any passengers or crew who may have been trapped would have had a traumatic final minute as the stern fell back, started to flood, and took a vertical stance. These final moments would have included terror and prayers from the individuals as they awaited what was next. With that, we hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to check out this video on the right about which bow has more damage, the Titanic or Britannic, and I will catch you in the next video.